If you're struggling to hit weight PRs and rep PRs in your program, give these a shot, break that plateau. You're not falling apart. Stop doubting yourself. Hey folks, welcome to Smart Simple Fit. My name is Davin, and today we're going to be diving into a new series that I'm going to be doing here on my channel where I discuss various methods of exercise progressions that you can use in your program as you continue to make gains over time. This is basically going to be a programming playlist where we talk specifically about how to make your progressions on a session-to-session and week-to-week basis. Because as we all know, your gains eventually aren't going to be the newbie gains anymore. It's nice at the start of everyone's training program, right? You get those really explosive gains for months. Even the first couple years are really explosive as far as the gains are concerned, but that's going to slow down. It's a diminishing return. So to help you guys keep making gains in the long run without hitting plateau after plateau after plateau, without getting injured, without getting demoralized and demotivated with your training as your gains start to stall and slow down, these methods that we're going to discuss are going to give you the tools to keep making gains for years to come. All right, let's dive right into it. So today's video is on the topic of what's called double progressions. Some of you may already be familiar with what that is. It's a very simple concept. A double progression in your program is just when you take an exercise and you progressively overload that exercise by manipulating the number of reps performed in a set and also the load that's used for that exercise in your sets. Okay, so a great example of a double progression would be as follows. It's as simple as taking your bench press. Session number one, let's say your workout, this would be if someone was a novice, take 135 pounds, bench it for 9 reps. Next session, what you're going to do is 135 by 10. The weight stayed the same, but the reps increased. That's your progression. If you were to only progress reps or only progress weight, that would be single progression, right? So the next session after that, the third session, you're going to do 140 pounds, right? 5 pounds more, we manipulated the weight, and likely this is going to drop down your reps, so I just put 8 reps. It's possible you could match the 10 reps as well that you got on session 2 with the higher weight. That is possible. It would be contingent on you having a bit of energy in reserve, but the point is you can see what's happening over time. Session 4 and 5, as you might be able to imagine in your mind, right, extrapolating maybe 140 by 9, 140 by 10, and then go up to 145. That would be very typical of beginner-like progress on the bench press. All right, it would not be uncommon to be able to keep up with this for months before things start to slow down. Now, later in the video, I'm going to give you guys an example of how to use a modified double progression with a slightly more advanced level of strength that's going to allow you to make those gains, but that's basically a double progression in a nutshell. Okay, and honestly, I think it's just the normal way to train. If you don't manipulate your reps and sets, your reps and your weight, it's kind of limiting, right? Like if you only change one thing in your program, like only adding extra time to an isometric or only adding weight and only doing 5 reps in a set, never doing 6, never doing 3, never doing 12 or 13 or 14. It seems like a very limiting mindset, whereas my preference as a coach is to give people programs where they can essentially master a weight and maybe even come back to that weight in the future and hit it for a rep personal best. You know, you could build up from 8 to 12 and then switch to a heavier weight, and then maybe at some point in the future you'll come back to that previous weight and prove to yourself that you can do 16, 18, 20 reps even. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think that the double progression is not only the normal way to train, in my opinion, it is the most sustainable way to train because it's going to be increasingly difficult to always add 5 pounds per session or 5 pounds per week or 5 pounds every other week to certain exercises, especially something like a bench press. So the double progression is very intuitive, it's very straightforward, and it's going to allow you to make gains for a very long time. Typically, a single progression is referring to when you increase the load. So if you hit 135 by 5, then hit it by 5 again, then go up to 140 by 5, maybe hit it a second time or a third time, then go up 5 pounds, you would continue in that fashion. It's only the weight that's being manipulated, just the load. Okay, double progression, we've already discussed. Reps increase, then load. That's typically the fashion that you're going to see people change it. You're going to pick a weight level, subjectively master it, meaning that you pick kind of a range or a target that you go for. Maybe you could start with 8, build up to 12 or build up to 10. It's your decision, but the point is you should be roughly consistent in those rep goals, in those changing rep ranges, natural hypertrophy we call evolving rep ranges. Point is, it's going to be subjective, but pick numbers that seem to make sense. On lateral raises, for example, you're going to need to build up for a very long time with a particular weight before you can jump 5 pounds. So if you're using the 15-pound lateral raises, you can only do 12 today. You might want to build up to 20 reps, 22 reps, maybe even 25 before you move on to 20-pound dumbbells, because that 5-pound jump is a huge jump, whereas a 5-pound total increase on the bench press is much smaller as far as the total percentage, and it's 2 arms at a time and not 1 arm at a time. Then there's what people would call a triple progression. I know Faz Lifts is a big fan of this. I'm feeling inspired to make this video after having an awesome discussion with Faz Lifts over on the Smart Simple Fit podcast series. If you guys haven't seen that yet, I highly recommend you check out our discussion. There was a lot of really good tidbits in there, a lot of good insights into the nuts and bolts of training. We got pretty technical, dove into a lot of depth in some of this stuff, and gave some real life examples of problem solving long-term and exercise programs. So I highly recommend you give that video a watch. But basically what a triple progression is, as opposed to the first two, you're going to increase in reps, then sets, and then increase the weight. So let's say you built up to the 135 by 10, rather than attempt 135 by 11 or move up to 140, you would add another set where you try and build up to the 10. But as you can imagine, adding that extra volume is going to have some consequences recovery-wise. Not necessarily if you're doing what would be akin to the rep goal system that Steve Shaw talks about and Basement Bodybuilding talks about, where you just try and increase the total number of reps per session. I think that's probably a better way for people to build up some volume. It's a little bit less drastic than doing a triple progression. That's not to say triple progression doesn't work. I think it's a really good tool, but let's say if you just wanted to increase your 10 reps total that session to 11, you could spread that out with a rest pause. That's a lot less volume than if you were to do 2 sets where you got 10 and then 9, right? That's a lot more reps being performed. That's not to say you can't handle 2 sets or 3 sets or 4 sets in a session or recover. I think most people can do that and often should do multiple sets per exercise per session. It's just that an entire set versus 1 or 2 reps total per session, it's kind of a different story. And yes, eventually if you build up, it's going to be the equivalent of having an extra set in your program, but that's not done over 1 session or short period of time. That's something you would build up to more slowly. So that's just my critique on the triple progression. All right, so now we're going to discuss 3 ways that you can modify the basic vanilla double progression to make it more sustainable over time to help you get gains without having to resort to significant volume increases. So we're going to dive right into the first method. Now, this first one basically just involves using a smaller weight jump. Some people would call this a micro progression. In fact, I've done a lecture talking about programming in the past where I talked about micro progressions. So I won't bore you guys to death, but the gist of it is you're just going to take whatever you would normally increase the load by, whatever increment, and just make it smaller, but still objectively measurable. A great example, this would be true for like many exercises, would be to take a 5-pound jump and decrease that to just 2.5. So where would this apply? Could be something like a biceps curl where you're using a dumbbell in each hand. So rather than jumping from 25 to 30 pounds, for the biceps curls, 30 pounds each hand, rather than make that huge jump, you can do 27.5. 27.5 is going to be a lot more doable. It's a greater likelihood of clean reps. You're more likely to do a higher number of reps, and so the actual experience, like the quality of the reps, the speed of the reps, the range of motion, those things aren't likely to change as much when you make these smaller jumps. And also, you're less likely to hit that wall and just, oh, I thought I could hit 10, I thought I could move this thing, it's too heavy to move even once, right? So for something like a dumbbell exercise, that's really important. Now, 2.5-pound dumbbells, or 2.5-pound increments for dumbbells is something you're really only gonna find with like adjustable dumbbells that you can buy for yourself, for your home collection. Those are expensive. Or sometimes in a gym, you may have lucked out and found a gym that has 12, then 15, then 17.5, then 20, 22.5, 27.5, and so forth. But typically they're not going to go much past 30 if they do at all. So that's one downside. But how is this going to apply to other exercises? Squat. deadlift, bench press, overhead press, especially something like a bench press, or overhead press, where it's very, very difficult to add that next 5 to 10 pounds as you become more intermediate, more advanced of a lifter as the months and years go by. Adding just 1 1/4 plate per each side is enough to make a difference. It's measurably harder, and if you're doing a biceps curl even, or overhead press, using a barbell in either case, if you add even 1 pound to each side, right, a 2-pound total increase, that's worth it. Would it be worth it to use those little 0.5s? Those maybe aren't as common. Sure, it's measurable, and worst case scenario, you say, oh, that's too little weight to make a difference. Okay, just improve more frequently, as frequently as you can with good quality reps. But the point is, find some sort of measurable way to make the weight just a little bit heavier. That way when you attempt progressions, as we're going to see in this example in a second, it's going to be really doable. That's what you want. You want tasks in your exercise program that are progressive but doable. All right, now here's an example, the bench press. Okay, so this is very similar to the example that I had on the board earlier, but I added 50 pounds to the starting weight to basically just to demonstrate that this is a more advanced lifter. Not that this is an advanced or an elite lifter, but certainly if he's 50 pounds stronger than the last guy, he's been training longer, right, typically. So someone who you would expect to make a bit slower gains than that person of the first example. So here you have on the first workout, right, first example, 185 pounds for 9. Then on the next workout, 185 by 10. Now, if we were going by the old progression of using sort of like a rep goal where, oh, I hit 10, now it's time for me to increase the weight, it would be going up to 190 and maybe would be able to do 8 reps with good quality form. Again, these don't have an RIR or RPE prescription. That's fine, don't worry about that. But the point is, you would not be able to do this, you wouldn't be able to do 190 by 10 like 3 days or 4 days after doing 185 by 10 unless the 185 by 10 was pretty easy. That's the only way that's going to happen. So it would look something like this versus what we're going to do with the method. We're going to just have 188.5 by 8. And that might feel reasonably easy. In fact, it might feel a little bit easier than one of these two. And in that case, it just means that the next time you would work out after that would be 188.5 times 9, then times 10, if you can keep up with that progress. And again, having these 2.5 pound jumps occur at the same frequency that you used to add 5 pounds is going to make things a very, very smooth transition. That's what you want. You don't want radical jumps that change things. That's one of the things that's annoying about training certain exercises is, oh wow, I added 5 pounds, it just completely tanked my reps. It went from like 22 down to 10. And as is the case with many dumbbell exercises, right, like curls and lateral raises. So if we can make that transition process smoother, then that's great. Okay. Great. Okay, method number 2. And this is, without doing any sort of change in the scheme as far as, dropping the weight, like the third one will be, or using a smaller increment. Now the increments are all the same and all that stuff. You could use all the same rep schemes. So if you had like an 8 to 12 range, where you start with 8, build your way up to 12, then add weight, you could still do that, right? Nothing's really changed with method number 2, except it's a less frequent change, right? So you're going to be repeating workouts in order to accomplish this. And I think it stands to reason, and you guys will discover this in your experience if you train hard enough and long enough. You're going to realize you don't always have to work harder every single workout. Ideally, you work harder measurably every single week. But if you do 2 or 3 sessions with the same reps, same load, it's probably enough to be stimulating still progressively without actually applying progressive overload. This is leaning into that concept that some people will talk about. Let's say progressive overload is the result of training and not the thing you do to get results. Well, it's both, right? Like progressive overload demonstrates that you are better, but the reason why you're pushing harder is to keep that going. Otherwise it stagnates, right? So it's a give and take relationship always with progressive overload. But basically, here's the best big picture way you can think of it. Regardless of how often you train, here's how your perspective on training is going to change if you use method number 2. Think about and plan to do a weekly progression rather than session to session changes. So that's going to be true if you train twice a week, 3 times per week, right? Regardless of which exercise we're talking about here, when you train, think about doing it on a weekly basis and not a session-to-session basis. Now the example, I'll give you an example here. The deadlift, okay, week 1, this guy's going to be deadlifting twice in a week. He's going to deadlift on Mondays and Fridays. Monday, he does 250 by 9, and on Friday, does the exact same workout, 250 by 9. It's not a stagnant stimulus. It's only a stagnant stimulus if it was too easy in the first place, or you've hit that number and then just keep hitting it like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, right? It doesn't get that easy that quick. I think it's pretty reasonable to say at least 2 or 3 times that you repeat a workout, it's going to be effective, right? And for a lot of you guys watching this, you probably train to failure on a lot of exercises, or you keep 1 in the tank, or you keep 2 in the tank. Some of you might keep 3, right? There's going to be some nuance to how you guys train, but the point is, those are genuinely very hard sets, especially going heavy on those compound movements. You don't always have to push the needle along, right? So week 2, now what's going to happen? On Monday, now it's up to 250 by 10. Friday, now it's 250 by 10 again, and then the next week, you could either go up to 255 and then see how much your reps need to drop, or you could try an 11th rep. It's up to you. But the point is, this double progression is basically just slowing down the vanilla double progression. This is going to give you a really good opportunity to master a weight and make sure that your technique is on point. Maybe the first time you do 9 reps, maybe you didn't have full control over the weight on the way down or the way up, whether that's a bench press, a deadlift, or a squat. So one of the things that you can look for on that week when you're repeating it is to make sure that if there's any deficit in the quality of those reps, try and improve that. And if there's not much, or any at all, there's no deficit in the quality of your reps, then just be content with the fact that you're working hard. Yes, the task is repeating. That's not a big deal. If you were strong enough to do more, then eventually you could try, right? If you genuinely have 1 in reserve, then you just know that it's going to happen the next time you do it. So push for it next time. Don't let this type of thing get in your head. It's a perfectly valid way to train, to repeat your workouts once or twice. It's not a big deal. Far be it for me to say you can't do it more than that, right? I think we get a little bit too caught up in chasing progressive overload. Progressive overload is necessary. Progressive overload is awesome. There's so many ways to do it. It can be really, really simple. But at the same time, it has to be justified when you attempt those said progressions. So the last improved method, number 3, I like to call this one the flip-flop method. This just means that you flip-flop back and forth between 2 weight levels. You could also alternate a list of weight levels, let's say 3 or 4, as long as you go through those same weight levels on a month-to-month basis or even week-to-week basis. So work out A, B, C, D, and have those 4 different weight levels, and every time you come back and hit it, you can have different rep PRs that you're accumulating, or within the same workout, let's say you do 3 sets of bench, you can have a weight level for set 1, a different weight level for set 2, different weight level for set 3, and then boom, you can try and attempt progressions at different weight levels. But the point is, with the flip-flop method, you're going to pick at least 2, I would say just 2 at a time, weight levels that are very similar. And you're going to need the load to be decently big in order for this to work, unless you use the micro progression method as well. But basically what this will look like is pick 2 weight levels that are very close, and this is going to work better with a higher load. So something that's like in the 200s, in the 300s, something like that. If your weight's down in the 100s or below, this is probably not going to work that well mathematically, but here's what the gist of it is. You alternate these loads in order to hit rep PRs at a load where it's going to be doable to hit that next rep for the sake of quality, safety, and just that you actually have the strength. You're not overshooting it this way. Here's a great example, back squats. Week 1, you do 225 by 10. Then, later that week, you're going to do 220 by 11 instead of 225 by 11, which you would have done otherwise with the vanilla style, or you would have done 230, let's say by 8 or 9, right? So rather than do either of those, you're going to actually decrease the weight and hit that extra rep. Now, if you punch into a calculator 225 by 10 and also 220 by 11, what you're going to notice is that the 220 by 11 projects a higher 1 rep max, meaning it is a higher feat of strength. It's a more impressive feat of strength, slightly. It requires more strength. Now, you shouldn't take this information as definitive proof that your 1 rep max is going up very, very quickly, or that this is an exact 1-to-1 calculation of your 1 rep max. That doesn't even matter. What it simply demonstrates is that if you do 1 extra rep with the load being slightly less. Yes, technically it's a lighter weight, but if it's only slightly lighter, it's objectively a harder task. And that's all we want, right? We want a harder task. It makes intuitive sense to do the same weight for more reps. Maybe it's less intuitive to slightly drop the weight to do more reps. But like we've been talking about this whole, like I've been talking about this whole video, the point is, this is to match your diminishing returns. When you're a beginner, you don't need to think about stuff like, oh, is it, just very slightly, when we calculate it, is it slightly harder? No, you don't need to think about stuff like that. You just hammer out the reps and sets, as long as you have good technique, right? It doesn't matter that much. Okay, so week 2, after you've done 225 by 10, then 220 by 11, week 2, now you're gonna go back to 225 and hit 11. So it's like, So it took you multiple sessions to get there, even if you had the strength on the second session of week 1 to hit that. You're saving that little reserve energy for the sake of your rep quality and to make sure that you don't hit a plateau. So week 2, 225 by 11, and then in this example, I subjectively chose to have the person move up in weight. So 230 and do that for 9 reps. Now that 230's been introduced, you can subtract the 220, right? So it's like you're constantly wanting to get rid of the smaller of the 2 weights that you alternate. So now what this person's going to be doing is increasing reps on 230 and still at 225. So this can become 225 by 12 on week 3, 230 by 10, so forth. If that person feels confident going up to 235, then now you have 235 and 230. You could even go back to 220 and hit 13 or 14 or 15. Right? Like there's no hard and fast rules with exercise training. The point is, if you have a couple weights that you're playing with and they're close in weight, this is going to allow you to very sustainably, very reasonably accumulate those extra rep PRs. And like I said, this is really only going to work well on those bigger absolute loads. But that being said, if you want to use this on like a bench press or overhead press and you're only strong enough to do your working sets somewhere in the hundreds or something like that, or even below, you could try this. But make sure to fact check yourself with a 1 rep max calculator. Try it with the 2.5 progression, right? Doing that 1.25 on each side. That might make enough of a difference. But make sure to check with the 1 rep max calculator that what you're doing is projecting a higher 1 rep max, which is proof that it's a harder feat of strength. And that's it. That's pretty much all I got for you guys. So I hope you incorporate at least one of these different methods. Personally, I've used these different methods multiple times on different exercises in the past. I'm going to continue to use all 3 of these to help prevent me from really needing to do much of like a complicated or very strict regimented periodization or do this many weeks of training, then deload and so forth. Like I want to have as few arbitrary rules in my program as possible, keep things simple, work hard, but at the same time I want things to be very, very doable so that my body can recover and that I don't get hurt and I don't end up developing bad habits for the sake of my ego just to hit those rep PRs and those weight PRs. So like I said, I was feeling motivated to make this video after my discussion with Faz Lifts. By the way, go check that out if you haven't already. It was an awesome episode, and go sub his channel. He's a great dude. If you're struggling to hit weight PRs and rep PRs in your program, give these a shot. Break that plateau. You're not falling apart, okay? Get your sleep and food dialed in first. And if those things are on point, stop doubting yourself. You just need to be a little bit more patient perhaps, or try some more bite-sized types of progressions on a week-to-week basis. That's all there is to it. All right, have a good one, guys.